Threatening the man who for 3 years helped battle crime, fight terrorism, and yes, lead an investigation into the president's own campaign, an investigation that is still ongoing. The president just wrote, James Comey better hope that there are no tapes of our conversations before he starts leaking to the press. I want to bring in CNN's Jessica Snyder in our Washington bureau. Jessica, this has to do with apparently calls for pledges of loyalty and also claims from the president that he was assured by the FBI director that he wasn't under investigation.
And you know, John, these tweets really threaten to further erode the relationship between President Trump and the FBI. President Trump here in these tweets coming out on the attack, really threatening former FBI Director James Comey, saying he better hope that there are no tapes of our conversation before he starts leaking to the press. So some of the differences in how those conversations between Director Comey and President Trump were in some of those dinner meeting that they had earlier this year. But of course, we know that the FBI director was really well respected at the FBI. I've heard it from a few of the FBI agents that I've spoken with. And of course, we heard it from the acting director, Andrew McCabe, when he testified yesterday. He said that Director James Comey was very well respected, very well received. And despite the White House saying that morale at the FBI is low, we know that, in fact, morale at the FBI was high. Many people respected James Comey. So it's unclear at this point why the president is coming out on the attack, especially in light of the fact that he was considering, the president, visiting FBI headquarters today. We know that plans were in place for him to potentially go over to the headquarters. They had been making preparations for that at the Bureau. But then two officials telling our Jeff Zeleny that those plans were scrapped because of the timing of this. And of course now, John, with the timing of these tweets, the optics of this, and the relationship between the president and the FBI seems to continue to erode. The president not doing himself any favors with this tweet. John?
No, you bring up a great point. How will this be received by the current members, the agents at the FBI? Jessica Snyder in Washington, thanks so much. We do have more breaking news this morning. Is an unread message from the president. We're proven to go, he wrote. As a very active president with lots of things happening, it is not possible for my surrogates to stand at podium with perfect accuracy. Maybe the best thing to do would be to cancel all future press briefings and hand out written responses for the sake of accuracy. You could cancel briefings. You could do that. Another choice would be to cancel lies. This was the White House on Wednesday on the issue of who first decided to fire James Comey.
So it is the White House's assertion that Rod Rosenstein decided on his own, after being confirmed, to review Comey's performance.
Absolutely.
Isn't it true that the president had already decided to fire James Comey, and he asked the Justice Department to put together the rationale for that firing?
No.
So this was the Vice President of the United States that same day.
The president took strong and decisive leadership here to put the safety and security of the American people first by accepting the recommendation of the Deputy Attorney General to remove Director Comey.
And now this is the new official presidential version from last night.
I was going to fire Comey. My decision. It was not.
You had made the decision before they came in the room.
I was going to fire Comey. I was going to fire regardless of recommendation.
Happy Friday, everyone. A phrase, by the way, first coined by the president after he came up with Prime the Pump. Joe Johns for us at the White House. Joe, this has been really an incredible, unprecedented week of attempted cleanups at the White House to really explain why they said things that were not true.
That's absolutely right, and there's been a lot of cleaning up to do. The truth of it is, especially in early administrations, and I've been through 4 of them in and out of the White House from time to time, you do have a problem with coordination of the message between, say, the President of the United States, the higher up officials, and the people who are actually talking to the media. But the problem with the president suggesting getting rid of the briefings and putting out paper statements is one of the things that distinguishes the U.S. system from a lot of the other systems around the world is the appearance, at least, of transparency and openness that comes from a senior aide taking daily or almost daily briefings and questions from the media. So that's clearly a problem, but this administration certainly has been working very hard to change the dynamic between the press shop, the president, and the news media who cover the president very closely. This is yet one example. Not clear at all the extent to which the president really wants to do that, but I guess we're just going to have to see. One other note, I did check in with the people in the press shop here about the president's tweet relating essentially to what the president wrote, saying maybe Comey needs to be careful if there are any recordings of the conversations. Checked in with them, and the press shop certainly did not want to weigh in, telling me, among other things, I think it is what it is. And I don't think there's anything to add beyond what he at this juncture. Careful, go further than the president in his tweets.
It is what it is, John, but it isn't what they say. At least it wasn't on Wednesday. Important points to make. Joe Johns at the White House, thank you very, very much. Joining me now, Chris Cillizza, CNN politics reporter, CNN editor-at-large, Errol Louis, CNN political commentator, political anchor at Spectrum News, Mary Ellen O'Toole, former senior FBI profiler and former FBI special agent, and Steve Vladeck, a CNN contributor and professor at law at the University of Texas School of Law. Guys, I suppose let's break this into two parts. Let's separate the politics of this for a moment and just take a moment to recognize that the President of the United States did threaten James Comey, saying, you better hope that our conversations were not taped. You know, Mary Ellen O'Toole, you worked at the FBI for, 28 years. How will that message be received within the FBI?
Not well. Not well at all, because the agents and all the staff of the FBI would look at that and take it very personally, because they all are very supportive of Mr. Comey still. So that will not set well with them.
And Steve Vladeck, to you, Steve, what line was crossed here? There's been all this talk about, is the president obstructing justice? Did he obstruct justice by firing James Comey? Did he cross a line by asking James Comey at a dinner on January 27th, am I being investigated? And now today, threatening the FBI director that he fired.
Yeah, I mean, John, there are two different statutes we should be talking about. There's the federal obstruction of justice statute, but also, thanks to President Trump's tweets this morning, we're going to be talking now about the federal witness intimidation statute, which, I suspect we probably will conclude President Trump didn't violate. But the fact that we're even having the conversation is pretty preposterous. And really, the larger problem is the transparent and comprehensive violation of this much stronger norm that the White House doesn't interfere in ongoing criminal investigations, a norm that exists exactly for this circumstance, so that we can have faith that when the Justice Department and the FBI are actually carrying out a criminal investigation, they're doing it for legal rather than political reasons.
No, it's a great point. There are laws and then there are norms, and sometimes norms are what this country has been built on or grew on over the last couple centuries. Chris Cillizza, you're nodding your head in agreement. That will always get you called on next. I think this is an important moment. I mean, because people will say, again, this is Donald Trump being Donald Trump. He uses Twitter to communicate with his base. But threatening the former FBI director and then all with
statements in a month would be a huge story. Two of them in the space of the time it takes me to walk outside this building and get a tea is really, really. We have to mark it. I think you're right. I think it's difficult with Donald Trump because he does so many unconventional, unorthodox things and revels in it. It's hard sometimes to see the forest through the trees. I think some of that might be intentional on his part. But floating the idea of getting rid of the press briefing, let's see if he just said that or if that's an omen of something. Remember that they've talked about in the run-up, during the transition, in the run-up to his presidency, there was some talk of changing the way in which the press briefing was done, its frequency, who was invited, how they would do it. The Comey one, I think, is even more troubling.
Yes.
You stated it, but it can't be stated enough. This is the sitting president of the United States, 72 hours after he fired the FBI director for unclear reasons, but largely I think because he wasn't enough of a company guy, threatening him into silence.
Many untruths from the White House this week.
Well, that's right. And look, Donald Trump does not want to get into a swearing contest with James Comey or, frankly, anybody else. We've heard enough non-truths from the president that he refuses to back down from, that his word is questionable, to say the least. You know, there is, if it were a normal conversation, if it was a normal person, you could say there's room for ambiguity, that if he said something along the lines of, you're not under investigation at this time, well, that could change the following morning. So sort of bullies with empty threats are the ones who make those threats. It's a product of frustration and powerlessness, and I think that's probably coming from
one kind or another, to firing James Comey, among other reasons, because he would not declare his loyalty. Loyalty to the president. Well, you were at the FBI. Did anyone ask you to declare your loyalty to anything other than the Constitution? And had they demanded it, what would your response have been?
No, I was never been asked. Moral, of course, would be unacceptable. So there's loyalty, and then there's...
Go ahead, Steve. Were you talking? No, okay. Steve, 1 second. I heard some noise in my ear at that point. There's another point which you bring up, and there are plenty of actors, in this unfolding yet serious drama right now. One of them is Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, who we have learned will go to Capitol Hill to brief senators in a closed-door meeting next week about his role in the firing of James Comey. Of course, remember, the White House first claimed it was all based on a recommendation from Rod Rosenstein. This does not turn out to be true. We know that because the president told us finally it wasn't true yesterday. You say either Rosenstein didn't realize he was going to get played or he did. The former makes him seem like a fool. The latter comes off much worse. Explain.
Well, I mean, I think the real question is, why does someone like Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein, a career federal prosecutor, someone who has been around the block, why does he write that memo if he even suspects that it's going to be appropriated to the ends that it was? And if he does write that memo, knowing that it's going to be used as cover for a decision that the president himself later admits is all about not trusting Comey and being worried about the ongoing Russia investigation, is Rosenstein then complicit in this entire matter? And John, I think this is the most important point. Yes, all of this noise out of President Trump, all of the sort of inconsistencies from the White House are alarming. But let's not forget what this is all about. This is all about the underlying investigation into what role, if any, the Russian government played in the election. You know, President Trump's not going to be able to make that go away. I think the real question now is, does Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein pick up the thread and run with it to sort of prove
threatening the FBI Director James Comey over leaks? And I don't, there have been a lot of, imagine.
Number one, on the leak front, or on the sort of people willing to defend Comey without their names attached to it. The other thing is, my guess here is that Trump basically threatening James Comey, and then with the weird, like, Nixonian, we hope there aren't tapes, which is an odd thing to throw out there given the week that we've had and the comparisons to Nixon and the Saturday Night Massacre. But if anything, it would make it more likely in my mind that Comey would speak out. I mean, you now basically have Donald Trump calling him a showboat, blowhard, a show pony, and then basically saying, you know what we talked about. You better not. I mean, really raising questions about a guy who, might not be every person's. People said this guy's equipped this because.
Remarkable week. Smart move for the president to bring up tapes harkening back to Watergate, which is something that everyone has been comparing to this week to begin with.
No, of course not. You take the Watergate overlay and you put it on top of it. I was just tweeting out with some viewers earlier this morning that at this point in the Watergate investigation, about 60+% didn't think there was anything serious about it. It was only when the hearings began that the country really woke up to what the so-called insiders were talking about. So we seem to be marching down a very familiar path here.
All right, guys, thank you all so much for being with us. A lot of breaking news to cover this morning. So many mixed messages. The president defending those mixed messages, threatening to cancel the press briefings. We're going to talk to two men who might very well have been press secretaries under different circumstances. What do they make of what's going on? And then caught in the middle of this controversy, the Deputy Attorney General of the United States apparently unhappy about how he is being portrayed. Now Rod Rosenstein called to Capitol Hill to give his version of events of what happened. We're going to speak to someone who knows him well. All right, new this morning, the president threatening the former FBI director James Comey, also threatening to cancel press briefings. He's doing that at the same time he's issuing a bold defense. A bold defense of what, you might ask? Accuracy. He wrote on Twitter this: as a very active president with lots of things happening, it is not possible for my surrogates to stand at podium with perfect accuracy. That perfect is the occasional forces. Presidential campaign. One disclaimer: both Alex and Tim worked hard to defeat Donald Trump during the primaries and, frankly, each other. But I take it they will get along right now very, very well. Brian, first to you, perfect accuracy. Is that a fair standard? Is the president being straightforward there?
There should be a high standard, if not perfection. We should expect the best out of every White House as far back as we were born. This is suggesting there's no standard at all. I think the biggest story of the first 100 days was dishonesty. So far, the biggest story of the second 100 days has been dishonesty. And that's disappointing whether you're a Republican or Democrat or you don't care about politics at all. We should expect as accurate as possible statements from the White House. And Trump seems to be saying, no, that's not going to be possible. All
right, Tim Miller, to you. How would you grade the performance of the communications office of the White House this week?
Oh, boy. Their boss has left them with a really tough task. And, here's the thing, John. You can't turn Donald Trump into the 10-point plan guy. And, all communications directors are going to spin and parry. And we have to give these guys a little bit of leash because their boss is so unconventional. But here's the line. You can't go out there with ridiculous lies. And when they came out on Tuesday and said that James Comey had been fired because a career bureaucrat that nobody had heard of named Rod Rosenstein had made this suggestion to the president based on the fact that Comey was too nice to Hillary Clinton. And then the president said, good point, Rod, I'm going to fire Comey now. I mean, that's preposterous. And it's insulting to us to come out with that kind of lie. And I think that is the crux of the problem here. It's not a communication strategy problem. It's the fact that it was just such a bold and ridiculous lie that they were trying to sell.
Hey, look, it's possible that Sarah Huckabee Sanders did not know that she was saying things that were untrue. So you can question whether the word lie matters here. The same thing with Sean Spicer.
Rod Rosenstein was the reason why Comey was fired? I
mean, if she did not think so, then she was lying and she should have refused to say it. I mean, I think we can all agree. Alex Conan, Nicole Wallace, who was a communications director under George W. Bush, said she claims that she was never asked to go out and lie, and had she been, she would have refused and she would have quit. Again, if you know you are saying things that are untrue, do you owe it? Because you work for the American people here ultimately. You don't just work for the president. Do you owe it, to yourself and to the country to not say it?
You're only as effective as your credibility. And once you ruin your credibility, you are not an effective spokesperson. That's why Nicole said that she would never go out in front of on a TV camera and lie to the American people when she worked at the White House. I worked at the White House for Nicole, and I had a very similar standard. I would never knowingly go and lie to a reporter. Own credibility. President Trump, he is ruining his administration's credibility, and he's ruining his own credibility, which matters in the long term. Look, there will be crises that this administration needs to face, and if you don't have credibility, if nobody believes that you're telling the truth, it's a lot harder. In fact, that's made this week harder because he lied so much during the first 100 days. When they came out on Tuesday night and said, this is why we're firing Comey, a lot of people didn't believe them because and frankly, I don't know how.
Saying that we've got two Alex and Tim, but communication, this is about this. Kind of like if I open a restaurant, John, and the restaurant has a rat in.
Communicators that are to blame. This is not. This is even if it's the underlying problem. The policy is wrong, or the way the president handles something is wrong. I actually think this is a case where the communications is at fault. Look, I think there were legitimate reasons to fire Comey, and I think that if the administration had had a concrete, well thought out rollout plan where they leaked out in advance that the president was considering this, they built a public case for it. By the time it happened, it was graceful. Nobody was surprised. We would be in a very different world than we are right now, where they announced it with no thought into the rollout. It was a communications debacle. They obviously had talking points that were faulty. That has made this crisis so much worse for Trump, and his tweets this morning are not going to put it back in the box.
And it's important to note what Alex just said there is he thinks the policy of firing James Comey is perfectly justifiable. Alex says in and of itself. Tim Miller, to you, as someone who has been yelled at by you, right? You don't necessarily think reporters are always the best people in the world, and you often don't like the way that we do things. Are the press briefings important? Do you think it is important to have reporters there asking questions of the press secretary?
I always yelled at you in good cheer, John, when you messed things up, which you did with regularity. Look, of course it's important to have these briefings, though I do think the Trump tweet this morning is kind of ironic because yesterday, I said to one of my colleagues, we might not necessarily have to have these briefings if the press secretaries are not going to know or not going to say, what the truth is, and if the president is going to continue to undermine them. And so it is important to have these, but it's important to have press briefings where they're basing what they're saying in facts and truth. I mean, obviously, you're going to face on in 20 minutes later consistently. Why are we asking, Sarah Huckabee these questions if she isn't able to give the answers?
Fair question. Brian Stelter, Alex Conant, Tim Miller, great to have you with us. Thank you all very, very much. You can yell at me anytime, Tim.
See you, John. Thanks.
The Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, reportedly telling the White House to set the record straight on his role in the firing of James Comey. This is lawmakers push to learn more about Rosenstein's role. He is headed to Capitol Hill. We're live there in a moment.
I wrote you a love note.
All right, we're learning this morning about what is sure to be a contentious meeting on Capitol Hill next week. The Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, being summoned for a closed-door meeting with all U.S. senators to explain his of James Comey.
Explain the integrity of that investigation. We have seen numerous Democrats coming forward as recently as this morning, just within the last hour on our air, Representative Elijah Cummings imploring for him to appoint a special counsel independent of the Justice Department and the White House to take the lead on this Russia investigation. Some Democrats calling for his recusal. But what we're going to see next is that Rosenstein has been invited to meet behind closed doors, the full Senate, to get the full picture. Both Republicans and Democrats want to know Comey's firing investigation forward. That acting FBI director did not believe that the White House would influence or continue to influence the FBI's investigation. Some people on the House side, namely the top Democrat Adam Schiff of the House Intelligence Committee, doubted that that would be true.
I don't think you can say so categorically he's made no effort to interfere. I think that the firing was all about the Russia investigation. So I'm certain that what Mr. McCabe said may be true in the sense that the president isn't calling line agents who are working on the investigation or in other very ham-handed ways trying to interfere with the day-to-day operation of the investigation. But nonetheless, he fired the top cop on that investigation, and I think no one believes this was about Hillary Clinton's emails. I think it was all about the Russia case.
So, John, we're down to the Senate next week. Not only Rosenstein going before the full Senate, expected to happen next week, but also the fact that James Comey, the fired FBI director, has been called to meet before the Senate Intelligence Committee, again in a closed session, not open to the public. But of course, we're going to be trying to get as much information as possible, gleaning from those two very significant meetings. What happened over Comey's firing and where the FBI investigation into Russia's meddling goes from here. John?
Yeah, you better bet we'll try to find out what happens behind those closed doors. It will be fascinating. Suzanne Malveaux, worked with Rod Rosenstein. General is
a lot of confidence. He's going to be a smooth ship sailing through this storm. At how many lawyers was I speculate?
That's fair. So you don't want to put yourself in his head and try to tell us what he's thinking. How about what you're thinking? You're a friend to Rod Rosenstein. If the Deputy Attorney General was asked to do something which he feels uncomfortable with, or his statements were used in a way that he was uncomfortable with, what would your advice to him be? Tell him he should...
That he best for the tasks that he has to do to carry out the mission of the department, which he is very loyal to. Loves dearly, he's going to do the right thing. So far be it from me to advise him. He's far more seasoned and experienced. But I would say he is very safe, trusting his gut, which has led him very well for several decades in government service through some choppy waters. And I think he's going to do the right thing.
Messaging, unlike the...
What sounds like Rod is that he's going to stick to his guns and he's going to take positions that he believes in and not cow to pressure outside. Or people's expectations about what he should do. I think whatever he has done, he believes in, and I think he will stick up for himself, but more importantly for the department, because what I've learned from Rod, starting from when him, whatever...
them in terms of somebody else